I'm Mike, the co-founder of Haystack. Welcome to episode 3 of the Haystack Tech Uncovered podcast, where I'll be chatting with tech leaders, disruptors, academics and innovators about all things technology, software development and culture. Today I'll be speaking with James Heggs. James is the co-founder and CTO of Tech Returners, a learning and coaching community based in Manchester. They're committed to removing barriers that a lot of returners face after a career break from tech, as well as tackling the skills shortage in technology by empowering people to move into technology careers and providing continuous support, all the way from junior engineer to tech leadership. Really interesting conversation, and we cover a wide variety of topics, ranging from tech entrepreneurship, gender diversity issues, changing careers, and future tech advancements. I hope you enjoy the episode. All right, well, welcome to the podcast, James. So you're the co-founder and CTO of Tech Returners, which is a super unique business and, in my opinion, serves quite a niche but a really important segment of the tech community. I wanted to just kick off the podcast by asking, what role do you play in the business? What actually is Tech Returners and what problem are you solving?
Well, thanks, Mike. That's a really nice compliment. Tech Returners, our focus is on enabling individuals to return to their tech careers. So these are individuals that have had prior engineering experience, so software engineers. We've had people that have worked for some huge organizations and then for reasons to themselves, they've had a career break. A lot of the time that might be parental caring responsibilities or health or, any kind of reason for a career break, and then are now looking to return to their engineering careers, back into tech, return to tech. And a part of where the niche is that you mentioned, one of the challenges is that tech moves really, really fast. And a lot of the practices, frameworks have moved on from those career gaps. And we essentially just refresh those individuals with the skills that people are utilizing currently. And then in terms of my role, so co-founder and CTO, but my focus is on making sure that our curriculum or the material we cover for those returners is relevant to the industry, really. Making sure that we are, I always describe it as on the curve and what successfully large enterprises are utilizing in terms of software stacks, tech stacks, making sure we're on that curve with a view to also seeing what's coming down the track to make sure we're, refreshing people with skills that organizations actually need.
Yeah. So how do you actually identify those skills in the curriculum then? Because obviously technologies come and go, as you mentioned. There's huge buzzwords, and then 3-4 years later they could be kind of left to the sideline, really. So obviously there's technologies like React, like Vue, like Angular. Those are the big JavaScript frameworks. But how do you actually pick the ones that are going to be most useful for the organizations that you partner with?
Yeah, so that's a great question, because it comes down to whether we take a broad sweep of technologies. Like you mentioned React there. So React is one of those where you go, well, 80% of organizations, that's a rough estimate, but are using React on their front end single page application. So let's cover that. And we kind of look at what is common across organizations. Another one of those choices we often have to make is on a cloud provider. There's lots of cloud providers out there, the three main being GCP, AWS and Azure.
Yep.
Market share, AWS have the biggest share still. But what it comes down to is we try and make it modular. So there's an underlying core of what you need to cover as an engineer, and that translates irrespective of the tech stack. So the principles behind React are similar to the principles behind, say, Vue. And if you cover it at that underlying fundamentals aspect, then you can layer in the framework or topic specific concepts. So for example, another one might be Java and C#. So the underlying principles of design patterns, don't repeat yourself, solid principles, object-oriented design, translate irrespective of whether it's C# or Java, then you layer in specific to the organization. So for example, if we're working with an organization that is C#, we don't upskill in Java for our returners because there's no point. They're going to go into a C# .NET world.
That's interesting. So you kind of get the fundamentals. You start with the fundamentals and then build on those. That seems to be the university approach, but a lot more granular than the university approach. I mean, when I studied at Newcastle Uni, and it was always you work your way up from assembly into the kind of object-oriented languages, and they build the fundamentals from there. And then kind of kicked off into the big bad world to sort of find your footing. Personally, it didn't feel like to me that there was any real element of genuinely partnering with businesses with the mindset of this person would be an ideal fit based on his skill set and his programming capacity for organization X, for example.
Yeah, on that. And that's where the word you said is partnership. So we'll meet with the sponsors and really get to grips with their tech stack. Even just subtle things, if we kind of go in and saying, let's create a curriculum that talks about Lambda functions and serverless, but actually the reality in that organization is that a lot of stuff they do is on-premise and it's on virtual machines or servers. Well, there's no point us going down this kind of shiny serverless microservices approach if the reality is very different. So we spend a lot of time understanding the actual true reality of how applications and software is deployed at that organization as well. Yeah.
So the audience that Tech Returners serves is, I think it's probably safe to say, not an audience that everyone would necessarily recognize. And I'm as guilty of that as anybody, I think. So where did the idea actually come from, and how did it actually develop and mature into a business?
Yeah, so we, myself and my co-founder Becky, it was born from a experience of returning to work following career break that Becky had, and losing a sense of network, because of being out of work, sense of like professional network, and then also being the only parent on a leadership team and experiencing the things that come alongside that, and then thinking actually I must not be alone here, with this kind of feeling. And then Becky set up Women in Tech North.
Right.
She's got I think nearly 2,000 members, maybe more now of that network. Good. Finding that actually this is a thing. And then Becky and I went into business really at the time as a consultancy, really. Nothing to do with Tech Returners, went into business as a consultancy to help organisations grow. We'd worked at the same organisation and we wanted to help other organisations grow. So I joined an organisation when I was the only full-time staff member. There was 3 people and I was the first employee. And then we grew to about 100 people. Becky joined that same organisation from a people standpoint, a HR standpoint. So we wanted to help other organisations go through up to that kind of scale and grow. And during that time, we trialled just a very initial proof of concept returner program. And it was actually Becky's idea. So in partnership with Barclays at the time, let's do a returner program. There was no commercial model behind it at all, but we just wanted to find out if people were looking to return to their technical careers. Basically, if there was an audience for it. Yeah. And we had, I think there was like 14 people, or the numbers were like, we had applications, and we didn't do any marketing behind it or anything like that. And we actually had people apply and get on the program. And it covered kind of coding, web application development, really. Nothing like what we do now. But a group of those individuals, quite a few of them ended up back in engineering careers. Like went to AO, Auto Trader, Think Money. Brilliant. Yeah, it was amazing. And and then we thought, well, let's do another one. We did a second one. And again, like I said, it was all free and there was no charging to businesses or anything like that. There's literally no commercial model. And then we got more people apply, enabled more people to go on to and into tech careers. And then that's when we thought, actually, let's see what we can do here. I think we've proved that there's a talent pool, so we say, for want of a better description, of people looking to return. Let's find out how we commercialize it. And we always, but we wanted to retain that accessibility. So we didn't want to put returners in a position of having to pay for something. It just felt wrong to have to charge people to return to careers that they've already been successfully doing and they've just had a career break. And we didn't want to make the boundaries for the program so high that you would have to do it full time, because even if we weren't charging for them, if they went full time without a revenue stream, they'd have to, you either bring in grandparents for childcare or source childcare. So we wanted accessibility really key. So we thought, right, how can we monetize this? Earn a living off it without losing that value of accessibility, both from a price point and a time commitment. And that's when we struck upon the model of working with businesses. And we still kick ourselves to this day that our first client was the BBC.
That's not a bad client, to be honest.
Still to this day, they were looking to run a program where they were looking to have an impact on their diversity, and kind of put out a program, like a tender really for providers, and we got down to the final two. And then they went with us, and this was in the BBC over in Salford. So we got that deal, and then of course after that point, that having that label helps a little bit to attract others.
To snowball, a bit of a snowball effect after that. I love that idea to prove the concept. So that's one thing that I've seen a lot of founders that I've been speaking to. It's this idea of there's almost a stage before the MVP of a product or a service that you produce, and it was called, one of my old bosses coined it an MVE, so a minimal viable experiment. It's almost this, can we just throw something up and see if it has legs, see if there's a natural pull to it. Maybe it's starting a newsletter, maybe it's developing this kind of a VIP service to prove that there is a bit of traction behind this, just essentially an idea floating around in your head. Because I think a lot of the time, early stage founders just have a little bit impulsive, I've got this great idea, let's just throw loads of money behind it. When in actual fact, you can give yourself a bit of a cushion if you just prove the concept extremely cheaply to start with, and just see if it has a bit of an organic pull.
Yeah, absolutely. We because we were doing that consultancy, it really got to a point where we were like, right, if we're going to do this properly, we're going to have to go all in. And that was the risk point. We'd set up a business, but there was two of us, but we've got decent consultancy gigs, and me from a DevOps viewpoint, and Becky from a people HR consultancy viewpoint. And it was like, right, if we go all in on this, we're going to give up that consultancy world and almost contracting world, shall we say, and then go for it. But yeah, let's run this free program. And at the time, the way we did it was I was doing DevOps consultancy that brought in revenue that essentially meant that we could both get paid, whilst we used, like Becky then set up the tech returners thing. So I was kind of bringing in money so that we'd got a revenue behind our business at the time, and then seeing that experiment. So it was, I suppose you would call it, if we were to be grandiose about it, but we were like seeding it ourselves, organically, and testing it out. Yeah. And then it wasn't until we seen, say, AO and like one of our, that first cohort join AO, that we're like, we could be in that value chain there. We could have, that's amazing. She's returned to tech, amazing, gone into an engineering career, but we could also, maybe there's something behind this, and that's it. Yeah. It
sounds like a really rewarding business to be part of, to be honest. I'm interested did you ever actually raise investment?
No, we've never took any money at all. No.
That's amazing. That's really impressive. So I guess you've identified a market niche, built a team, secured some amazing customers. What's been the most enjoyable part of building the business? And on the flip side, what's been the most difficult part?
Well, great question. The individuals that join the program, it isn't an overnight decision to take that commitment to return to your career. I suppose what I mean by that is they might be thinking for a number of years about when that return is, and almost in some cases building up the confidence to do that. As a parent myself, that making that decision to not do a school run on that day when you've always been the person, or not see that, miss out on that opportunity to see your child in that time where you're choosing yourself in a way, choosing your career. That's not an overnight decision, right? And people, if you've had a career gap, it can really dent your confidence. So the most rewarding bit is seeing those individuals that take that step, and it's a well thought through step that they're ready to return, and seeing them then come through our program and really like you see their confidence grow, and you see them just change really.
Yeah,
a lot of what we do isn't just teaching a bit of code. It's actually kind of confidence building, growth mindset and things, and seeing that in people. And then of course you think of the stories of the people we've worked with, people that spring to mind around their confidence. And we've had engineers. I remember one lady, she was previously at like Intel, Amazon, IBM, and then had a career break.
Yeah.
Couldn't get a job after that. And
Really?
it was because people focused on the career break. But nobody would ask her why and say, what have you done in that career break? During that career break, she had a really life-threatening illness, so had to take a career break, and then fought it off, and now is looking to return to work. So how much do you want to help work with somebody with that kind of attitude? So it's those, the stories of people that return, that's probably the most rewarding.
Yeah.
The most challenging is probably similar in a way, is when you want somebody to believe in themselves to take a go at a role. And because we've had a number of times where businesses have been like, absolutely love that person, I want to hire them, and they hold themselves back and they won't accept the role because they think because they can't tick every box of the thing. And that's where you're like, where you could just instill a little bit of confidence. That's always a challenging part.
So how responsive has the businesses that you partner with been to the concept? Because to me, as an outsider, it seems quite narrow-minded to not consider, for example, the person that you're talking about who worked at Intel, Amazon, etc., to not even consider that person despite having what by the sounds of things is a fantastic CV. So what has been the business response to the concept? And do they ever come up with an answer as to why they don't consider these people in the first place, and why it took yourself and your business to actually encourage it and nurture it a little bit?
So if we just went down a model of, we've got these people, this bank of engineers, do you want to hire them? And there was no engagement throughout them being on the program.
Yeah.
It's always more difficult. So there is a thing there to kind of pick apart, I think, because by that stage you're just a name on a CV. And if an engineering manager is getting 50 people put in front of them, first of all, they'll say to the talent people, you need to put less people in front of me, you need to be better at filtering. And by that stage, it is just names and, like you mentioned earlier, like buzzwords of technology. Have they got Kubernetes on the CV? Maybe that person's interesting. But I can also, in the other breath, I can also understand being on that receiving end of CVs and being a hiring manager in the past. I can also understand why that situation occurs, because you want to bring in somebody that is going to be a great contribution to the team without, ideally without distracting from the value that the team currently provides.
Yeah.
So I can understand why that situation occurs. But what we do with the organisations is, rather than just saying we've got this bank of 16 people that have been through our programme, come and meet them if you like, they get involved from day one. So we increase the engagement so that they almost, during the period of the programme, are on a 12-week interview process. So both the individuals are learning about the business and the business is learning about the individuals during that programme. And it just helps increase a connection between the individuals and their backgrounds and the business. So that's how we go about solving that CV filtering phase, really, is to the other thing we do is take on at the early stages what their values are, so that even the people coming onto those programs are showing signs of the values that that organisation kind of lives by. And
all right. Yeah. So there's almost a pre-vetting stage before that.
Yeah.
That's quite interesting.
Yeah. It's right for the returner as well, because an interview is two ways, right? And you go into an interview and you might come out of it going, yeah, enjoyed the interview, seems like a great company, but it's not for me. Just because of different values, things they do, what you might be asked to do, how you interacted with the interviewer and things like that. So if we can get that more right, you're not going to get it perfect, but get it more right at the start, and be really open about the organisation, then at least it means that they know what they're going into for the sponsorship.
That's it. I think transparency is key at that stage. Everybody wants to know as much as they can about both the person and the organisation that they're potentially going to be put in front of. So I think I just wanted to kind of to dive into the current situation in the tech sector and obviously the COVID pandemic. So how do you think it's affected A, tech returners, and B, the tech sector as a whole?
So yeah, we can paint like a great story about BBC and things like that. But at one stage last year, I think it was around March time, as things kind of really shifted, that we knew if we didn't bring in more revenue, we'd be out of business by September.
Oh, wow.
And if we continued to spend at the rate we were spending, on team and things like that, and you have, we were all taught in business, me pretending like I know about business, but about your runway. Yeah. We could see that our runway came to an end in September. And we had a team of, at that time, 6 or 7 of us. And we had a decision to make, really. It's like, do you go for furlough? Mm-hmm. Do you go for redundancy and things like that, and removal of, however you want to phrase it, but losing people?
Yeah.
Or do we make a different decision? And Becky did it fantastic, but we chose the route of saying, well, actually, let's tell the team exactly how things are.
Yeah.
It's going to be, we might lose people. Some people might go, do you know what? I'm not on that journey for not knowing whether I'm going to have a job in September. But that's entirely fine. But if we give people the awareness of how things are, well, actually, we might get an alternative route where people go, right, what can I do about that situation?
Yeah.
What can we do? Let's put our brains together and work out how we're going to make sure that we, survive beyond that point. And that's what we did. So a lot of people say, oh, what did you do when that happened? And we always say, oh, we just told people. Yeah. We just told them where we're at. And the team were amazing. The team pulled together, and we got through that phase. So we went into a phase of, well, if we're not going to make sales, let's make people aware of who we are. Let's make sure that we're spreading out a brand. And then we were at that point just northwest, so we explored London. And then as things started to be a bit more, okay, this isn't going anywhere, is it? And businesses, I think, realised they started to have to make decisions rather than pause decisions.
Yeah.
That's when things started to shift, and we started to bring in organisations and make the sales. And that meant, now that one way is much, much longer. And now 13 people. But there was definitely a phase where you go, oh, right, this is really affecting us. And it wasn't that businesses were saying no, they just weren't, it was just, we're just going to pause that for a bit and speak to you soon.
It was interesting that I think at the start, everybody obviously went straight to kind of panic stations. And like you say, things were put on pause, people hit the brakes. But then quickly, it was actually really impressive how quickly people managed to adapt to what is essentially the new normal, the kind of the hybrid working policies, the working from home environment, and quickly realized, actually, we can still make this work. We just have to kind of batten down the hatches and think of new solutions and new ways to solve the problem in front of us. So it's been really impressive just speaking to other founders about how they've kind of faced the adversity, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there was some comfort in the fact that lots of businesses on different scales, different levels of impact, we've lost a lot of organisations as well. But everybody was kind of experiencing that, trying to navigate those waters that together, weren't they? Trying to understand and navigate that. So, and I think what helped us was even if it was a short-term solution, a lot of the solution to innovation and trying to say, how do we exist, was technology. We've got a customer, Nando's, and a lot of what they need to do, obviously it was always just restaurant based. We think of the restaurants, we think of Nando's, but of course they needed a digital queuing system.
Yeah.
Because people were now picking up their food and not sitting in the restaurants and things like that. And so technology kind of comes through and helps a little bit, doesn't it, in that one?
Yeah, definitely. So obviously the current scenario as well is it's produced a lot of challenges and a lot of it's increased people's awareness about the setbacks in the tech sector, and specifically kind of the HR sector and the recruitment professionals that work in tech. And I know a lot of your user base is made up of women, and one of the focuses of tech returners is tackling the gender diversity challenges within tech. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on the problem itself. Kind of, where does this gender diversity challenge in tech begin? How can businesses begin and start to challenge the status quo? And ultimately, how do we get more women involved in tech?
Yeah, I got a bit opinionated on this. So where it begins is there's a few factors of this, I think. I think it's at an educational level, of course, people always go to that point. I think there's a notion at the minute as well that when somebody says in tech, it means you code. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a challenge that needs to be kind of addressed. You know, like even at school level, they're like adopting technical curriculums now, and IT is not just being, can I use Word and Excel? But they're getting them doing like, you know, Scratch and coding. Yeah. But of course, that will isolate a certain demographic that are just like, I'm just not interested in coding. But that's not, there's so many other roles in tech. And I think there's a bit of a narrative that needs to be told there that isn't getting told around business analysts, you know, BAs, product management, testers, UI, UX. There's so many, you know, it's so broad. So I think that's one thing. And then I think in terms of where it is having an impact is, I think there's an awareness piece that's not taking place. So if I look back at so when I was first in a role of being responsible for engineers, you know, like tech leadership, shall we say? I look back and some of my approaches, some of my communication styles, how I approach the, you know, situations. I look back now and I thought, oh God, I can't believe, if anybody have like heard me, and it can just be subtle things, you know, with the language that we use that, you know, they're called microaggressive, that actually are completely isolating to people, right? And I don't think a lot of people admit that there is an awareness piece that needs to be taken place, a safe awareness piece. And it wasn't until I started to go to Women in Tech meetups. I remember my first one I went along to, and we were sat around. I was the only male. So straight away, that makes you get a sense of what it's like to be, say, a woman in tech at a meetup when there's 80 people and you're the only woman. It gives you that sense of isolation. And I went to a meetup and they were saying, it's like the meetups. They were just talking about meetups. And I ran a meetup at the time. And they were saying, I don't just want to eat beer and or have beer and pizza. And it wasn't until that point where I was like, oh my God, that's what we do. You know, not everybody wants to have beer. Some people might just want a glass of water or juice, or they don't drink. And there's a piece that needs to come through where people take themselves to those venues to be uncomfortable, to be in a moment of going, I'm now aware. And yes, I might have used language in the past, but I'm coming here to learn. And I think that's key as well. Kind of being made aware in a safe world of actually, this is the impact that language has on somebody and how isolating it can feel. Yeah, definitely. And it's not just tech. Like I often tell a story of when I went swimming. I used to do water babies with my little boy. Right. And there's that first phase in water babies where you have to literally get your child and you say, it's literally lesson 1, and you dunk them under the water. And it's as a parent, it goes against everything in your mind. So you're really nervous. I was in the pool and didn't even clock the kind of difference, so we say, between as parents in the pool. But the instructor had said to us, right, what I want you to do is dunk your child in the water, and don't worry, they've been swimming around in your tummy for 9 months. And it was at that point I was like, I'm pretty sure he's not been swimming in my tummy. But it was because they were used to addressing a group of mums. And being for whatever factor, being different. But that awareness, I think, is something that we can all support each other on. Yeah, definitely. I think when I say tech, I usually mean the whole STEM field, I guess. So science, technology, engineering, maths. But I completely agree. And I think I'm as guilty as anybody. I think I've been personally quite ignorant to the whole topic, and I've been trying to make it a point to educate myself a little bit more on a lot of the things that you were talking about there. Things like the language that we use in job ads, for example. I think I read a statistic before around
listing, kind of having a shopping list essentially of skill sets and criteria that you need to fit, and being a little bit more open-minded around that. I think, again, I would wrongly quote the statistic if I said it out loud, but it was something around men a lot looser with saying, yes, I have this skill set, when it's only maybe 60%, for example, whereas women would look and kind of say, right, I have this, but I don't have that, therefore I'm not going to apply.
Yeah, the boundary is much higher generally, is it? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So I think there's a huge education piece around there, and I think it's there's a lot of responsibility around it as well, and it's a really important thing to take on board. So just to get into kind of your own career path, you've been a developer, a coach, an engineering manager, a business owner, a CTO, so tech leadership as well. And without diving into kind of too much detail in the actual question itself, how did your journey into tech begin? And obviously, how has it progressed over the years?
Yeah, so I did AS levels, and after a year, I kind of dropped out. I was messing about, to be honest, and didn't enjoy them. And then moved on to I did a BTEC. So BTEC in computing, and that's where I really kind of, 100% attendance for 2 years. I always throw that out there. Which when you're like 17, 18 is a big deal, isn't it? 100% attendance.
I don't think I had 100% attendance.
And that was really, I put this on LinkedIn recently, like a conversation with my dad saying, get into computers. And I used to break our home computer and things like that. And then did that course, went on to university. But I think really I properly learned. I remember being really, really probably the edge of my comfort zone when I did my placement year. Mm-hmm. And that was where I remember having done the 2 years at uni thinking, okay, I can do a bit of coding. I'm not too bad. But I was enjoying it. And then going into a placement year and having that moment of, oh my God, I know nothing. Like people talking at me what they wanted me to do and thinking, I've got no idea.
Thrown right into the deep end.
Yeah, on my placement year. And I was with another student from a different university that was there as well. And he just seemed to have the brain the size of a yacht kind of thing. But then over the course of that year, really taught me kind of engineering practices and solving problems. And day by day, you kind of grow a little bit in confidence. You start to recognize patterns and problems. And then when I finished uni, I got my first software dev job. My first role, because I was playing five-a-side football with somebody and they said, I don't suppose you know any Java. And I was like, yeah. And that was on 16K.
All right, very good. Making the big bucks.
You get told these dreams, go to uni, become a software engineer. But it was brilliant. It was absolutely fantastic. It was a brilliant mentor as well. I did continue I say that I had about 2 years where I had those moments of facing a problem that you'd got a code up and thinking, I can't solve this. And then your mind spirals and you go, oh my God, I'm going to have to quit my job. I'm going to have to get home. I can't solve this. I'm going to have to quit my job. And you have those moments. But then bit by bit, you grow. And then following that, I joined a startup as their first employer. And then grown, because of the nature of our growth, it was a brilliant journey, like organisation. Nature of the growth meant that my role had to organically grow. So as bit by bit, we took on more engineers and I kind of took on responsibility for those engineers.
Yeah.
And then moved into Devops consultancy, which was different again.
Yeah.
Being on a government project at that point, part of what was called the GDS scheme, the Government Digital Service, which was, again, a great experience. Really interesting because it was totally contrasting being on a government project.
Yeah, I was just going to say that.
To start
I can imagine.
Commercial sector. Yeah, just give a different perspective. It's kind of, we often used to say it's like at the startup, it's like turning a speedboat, but then at a government, if you want to do change, and it was more like an oil tanker. Yeah. But it was fantastic, just as a different experience. And then it's around that time I went back as head of development at the previous organisation. And then decided that actually this is the point to take that dive and set up for yourself.
Yeah. So it sounds like you've clearly had, obviously, the experience in kind of starting, building, and scaling dev teams. I personally think at different stages of business growth, you need developers with different skill sets and mentalities. So, for example, in the early days of a business, I always say you kind of need people with a more of a hacker mentality rather than the engineering mentality. So people who can deliver and ship products or features really quickly, really effectively, but without worrying too much about tech debt. And as the business scales and grows and matures, and you bring on more customers and you bring on, I guess there's more relying on the robustness of the product, you kind of bring in more of the engineering mentality. So what's your take on this? What kind of tactics have you used to ensure that you hire in the right kind of person, depending on the stage of the business?
Yeah. Well, first tactic, I suppose, is to get it wrong. Definitely. So the product that we scaled with was, a lot of it was written by myself with the CTO at the time. Like you said, that hacker it was good, right? It was good for the time. And then, you do bring, like you said, you bring in those engineering practices. You start to have 4 teams working on it, and kind of all this Conway's law kicks in about how your teams are structured. But the first thing was actually trying to help individuals understand that things will move slower than they did in the past was always tricky. Because now you've got 10,000 people using it and not 10.
Yeah.
And you can't be as experimental, or you've got different people that have never done code on that particular platform and things like that. So the first thing would be, I got that wrong initially. And it was interesting, we got it wrong from a viewpoint of bringing in people that had all the engineering experience, worked at large enterprise organizations, banks and things like that. And we needed still some of that hacker mentality aspect at the stages that we brought them in. And also that kind of, that aspect of kind of being in it together rather than it being somebody else's role.
Yeah.
So definitely got that wrong a bit too early on. And then later on, we started to bring in that approach. But I think you need to always maintain, personally, I think you need to always maintain an aspect of both. I think you need to create almost an environment in which you can innovate in quick cycles, even when there's 200 of you, trying to create small ecosystems within teams that allow for innovation, autonomy within kind of safe bounds for those teams. So I think you still need an aspect of both, and trying to maintain both. You just need the nice guardrails around autonomy. Things where people know, because if you give people a boatload of autonomy without any kind of sense of direction or alignment, then you do just get sort of all over the place.
Yeah, I think there's that saying from Mark Zuckerberg, move fast and break things. It's a bit of a cliche, but if you allowed everybody to literally move fast and break things, then everything would be broken. So you need those guardrails in there. So obviously, tech roles have kind of skyrocketed in popularity over the last few years. There's a huge amount of people looking to make kind of a career U-turn, and a lot of it, again, has been brought to light by COVID. People have kind of realized that actually, I'm in this job, I hate it. It's a bit of a dead end. So they're looking to move careers. Or there's a lot of people looking to upskill and kind of make the leap into a development role. This obviously is a really daunting task and a bit of a minefield. So where do they start?
Somebody asked me this recently, actually, looking on LinkedIn, got in touch with me to find out kind of like, where do I start? Because it is daunting. And I think the first thing you have to do is try bits of practices, engineering, coding, maybe, before you make a decision on that.
Yeah. But
you can do that cheaply and free. There's so many good sites to help you understand whether that's fun.
Yep.
Some people might find, let's say if you're going into, you're interested in software engineering, that's the tech role that interests you. Well, there's so many avenues down that. Like some people might get a kick out of doing user interfaces, and that kind of gratification you get from seeing something that's beautiful. Other people might really like executing business logic and database interaction or data engineering. And there's lots of different avenues. So what I would say to anybody that's looking to do that is to, first of all, for as cheap as possible, find out which is actually fun. And if it's creating front ends, it's fun, then focusing on that route. And when I say cheaply as possible, there's sites like Free Code Camp, Udemy. You can get a program, but like they're £15 for a really good, well-written program.
They're crazy. They're really good Udemy. It's awesome.
Yeah, right. Even if you spend £15 and after 4 weeks you're just like, it's not interesting to me, then that's knowledge you can take on to the next bit. And
it's better than $9,000 a year for university, that's for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And even the boot camps that are fantastic for getting into tech, they're brilliant, but they tend to have a cost associated.
Yeah.
But if you can do a bit of that research yourself first before you go for the boot camp, because a great thing about a boot camp is it gives you a sense of direction and a curriculum to follow and peers to learn with.
Yeah.
But if you can do that, if you are going to get into tech a little bit early yourself, find out, because your career, whether it's software engineering, whatever, I think has to feel vocational. It has to feel like, fair enough, there'll be days you're like, I could do without it today. But most of the time, it should feel vocational and almost hobbyish.
Definitely.
And if you can achieve that, then find that out cheap as possible. It like is coding. If you get that thing where you've written 20 lines of code and all it says is hello world, but you are absolutely buzzing about that. You show friends or your partner or, family or whatever it might be. You go, look at that. And they go, is that all it does? But you're like, look at that. That's amazing. Then you're exploring the right route. So I always say, try as cheaply as possible, have a play, and then go from there. Then look at your more focused routes, maybe like boot camps or university.
So let's move on to the other end of the spectrum and kind of address the people who are currently working in tech. So what advice would you give tech professionals that are looking to make the leap into a leadership role, but who are maybe struggling to find the momentum to kind of do so?
Yeah, so on that front, in terms of engineers and stepping into leadership roles, I think the biggest thing you can do is support them with that approach, really. And what I mean by that is sometimes people can't see for themselves that they already possess a lot of those leadership skills. And that the other thing for a tech individual is we can often see leadership as a fork in the road, right? So you become you focus on that fork going to the route of enhanced technical skills. So I'm a developer, senior developer, technical architect, that kind of, if we're talking hierarchy.
Yep. Or
you see leadership going into people. And when people talk about people management or technical leadership on that fork in the road, that side, they often think of, I don't want to be managing people's holidays. Or the HR processes. So what I think how we can enable people to step into kind of engineering leadership roles is to already highlight the leadership roles they possess and highlight for them the tasks that they're working on, how they're already supporting others, and almost say to them, have you considered that? Have you considered kind of technical leadership? But establishing it, I think where we can support people is establishing it in a layer of credibility. So as a technical leader, I personally think you have to have a layer of technical credibility to support the teams that you lead. So if you identify for those individuals what technical skills they already have, the credibility they already have, and the impact that, yes, they might not have the title of tech lead or dev manager or whatever it might be, but they're already demonstrating their leadership skills, then ask them to consider it. And in a few months' time, they might pick that conversation up with you.
I think that's actually a really important distinction between sort of the roles that involve are more involved around managing people, and then there's other kind of roles like you mentioned, the senior dev roles or the technical architect roles, where you have essentially more responsibility over the code base, I would say, and more of a say about the overall architecture and build and deployment, essentially.
And those individuals, if they're already doing that, they're already being leaders. People will look to them and they'll have a discussion with, what are your thoughts on this and how I'm implementing it? So they're already demonstrating leadership skills. It's just kind of highlighting that for someone, and because they might not actually realize it.
Yeah, definitely. So I wanted to quickly touch on Devops. Obviously, you're one of the co-organizers of Devops Manchester. Am I right? That's the event, isn't it?
Yeah.
And obviously, Devops is a term that a lot of people know, but it's a bit of a black box, and not a lot of people know about it. So would you mind giving your definition of DevOps, and where do you see it actually fitting into the engineering sphere?
Let's start about why it exists. So if we think about what we ask product developers to do, or developers in that DevOps world, we ask them to focus forward as an organization, creating features. We're very focused on sprints or some kind of concept, and cadence. So every 2 weeks, what can we get done in the next 2 weeks? So we kind of focus on change. A part of our world is change. If you're in a developer, you're implicitly asked to change something a lot. Then if we look at an operations world, part of our world is stability. Keeping things on, keeping them available, keeping them working, running, because we have things like alerts going off and things like that. So you can imagine, not everyone, but a portion of which we might be a bit more change resistant. So we've got that world where our focus is stability, site reliability engineering, those kind of concepts in the ops world. And then this focus of where an organization is like, when's that going to be released? And milestones and sprint cadence and things like that. So you can imagine that those two worlds might clash.
Yeah.
Because we want to change it, we want to get this out. If you do, it might break, kind of thing. So DevOps for me is how we take the skills from both teams, or both skill set of individuals, I should say, rather than teams, and create an environment that they can lean on each other and trust in each other. So the practices that we do in dev, iterative development, testing, version control, actually writing things as code rather than kind of in somebody's head, those kind of practices in dev, can we blend those into what operations people do? And then in operations, how can we get our stability thinking, our awareness of architecture, networking, uptime, alerting, monitoring, logging, some of what you might traditionally call NFRs or non-functional requirements that are actually super, super important. Security is number one. How can we bleed that information into the dev world? And if we can, then essentially we've got this culture where we're enabling each other.
Yep.
There has been a bit of a pattern where a lot of teams will create a DevOps team in the middle of these two camps. Or they'll find people that have a bit of dev skills and ops skills, which I understand why that's come about. But actually, there needs to be a stage where there isn't a separate team. It needs to be blended into the teams.
Yeah. So when do you think an organization should pull the trigger and say, yes, we need a DevOps engineer?
I think when you're a certain size, you have to be. Like everybody, if you're not deploying the code, you probably are at a certain size of a startup. You're already. I wrote an article, I think it was in like 2009, on Devops.com about DevOps, and it was saying like at a certain size, you are already demonstrating these values purely because of necessity.
Yeah.
And I think rather than employing DevOps engineers, I would be looking at upskilling engineers of any form with operational skills.
Yeah.
And you'll only get a certain portion of your workforce that are interested in that. There's only a certain portion of people that are like, I want to stop doing C# and I want to write Terraform. Or YAML, because it's all just YAML. But there's only a certain portion of your team that will be interested in that, and they're the people that you can support with bringing them up on maybe the operational skills.
Yeah. That's really interesting. So there's a lot of kind of future tech advancements going on. There's buzzwords flying around everywhere. AI, edge computing, AR, VR, machine learning, NLP, etc. You can pick a buzzword if you really want. I was interested to hear, what future tech advancements are you most excited about? It could be products, it could be sectors, it could be coding practices, whatever.
You know that film Up?
Yeah.
And the dogs when they go squirrel about it, like new technology. I'm very much like that. So I'm like very much like get excited about new technology. But I think that stuff, it kind of comes and goes and it's interesting, but it's like you read a blog about it and you have a play with it and it's like, oh yeah, I could find a usage for this.
Yeah.
I think the thing that most excites me though is probably the awareness now that we have of team structures. There's a great book called Team Topologies. And in fact, we've got the author speaking at Devops Manchester, but the book's called Team Topologies, and it talks about kind of how teams can be structured to enable product delivery and essentially around structuring teams. And it's built out of their experience from working with teams of different scales, like huge organizations, and how they structured the people and how that's enabled those organizations. That's the stuff I think that is the most interesting. Because that's how you can enable teams to really thrive irrespective of the tooling they use.
That's interesting. I've never heard of that book, to be honest. I'll have to check it out. I usually get recommended a load of books, so I'll add it to my list. Yeah,
it's a great one. It's built out of his experience of DevOps and the peered books like the Phoenix Project and the DevOps Handbook.
I've read the Phoenix Project before. That was a good one. Yeah, just for anyone interested, we'll put a link in the notes for Team Topologies. So on the flip side, we're seeing a lot of criticisms of big tech, for example, for things like data farm and privacy concerns. Are there any technologies that you're particularly nervous about or skeptical about?
Maybe not technologies, because I always think it's the humans and the application of said technology that is the problem. Yeah. So like with machine learning, it's not until I've gone to kind of democratizing data meetups and things like that I've been made aware of how the algorithms can interact. And if you don't have people that will look at those systems with a critical eye, then we will start to get kind of decisions being made by AI that, because of the data that's been fed in, it will make a decision that is incorrect.
Yeah.
And we see it through society. There was a phase, I think this has been addressed now, but a phase where if you searched for CEO on Google Images, it would only ever come up with pictures of men for at least 10 pages or something like that.
Yeah.
And now that isn't that, I suspect, that's the system, because the data is overwhelmingly that there's male CEOs. It's just incorrect and not a nice part of the society that actually is more male CEOs. So that overwhelmingly that system is going to say male CEO and it's going to make a decision. But if you don't have those people in organizations, and this is where I think is the true value of diversity, and not just, whatever demographic you want to pick, but diversity of thought, critical thinking. If you don't have those people in organizations, then you're destined to make biased products. Yep. It only takes one person to say that camera doesn't recognize my skin color in that team before it gets released. And that's where I think organizations and technology, that's where I think the risk is.
Yeah, I actually completely agree. I think I'm less worried about the AI, for example, the AI algorithms themselves. I'm more worried about the programmer behind the AI algorithms and how they drive that. The creators of these algorithms need to be held accountable, I think, from a philosophical point of view. And it's those guys that have the responsibility to create humane tech, I think.
Yeah. And again, it's not that those individuals, when they're writing that, that machine learning model or whatever it might be, me talking about like I know about machine learning, but it's just what that challenge is that they're solving with the data that they've got. And you just need that one critical eye of, well, hold on, it only takes that one person to stand up and go, can I just try it? Or, that is potentially different to the data that's been fed in, and to find that there's an issue.
Yeah, definitely. So we're getting close to the end of the questions, and I just wanted to wrap things up by asking if there's any news that you'd like to share with our listeners first off.
So we've got a program starting that starts in September. That's with BAE Systems. That starts in September that we're looking for returners for. And then we've got, I'd tell the listeners to look at the website because we've got a few more with some big organisations starting October time and then November as well.
Brilliant. And finally, where can people connect with you online?
The best place is either LinkedIn for myself, techreturners.com is our website, and I'm also on Twitter as well.
Good stuff. And we'll also stick those links to those in the notes as well. All right, brilliant. Thanks very much for jumping on the podcast, James. Really interesting chat.
Yeah, bro. Thanks, Mike.